All right, Improvisation Center is back again with the 65 Truckstang. I guess that might be a fitting name for it because, well, it's on a truck frame. Engine crane is free and clear. We got the front and rear mounts secured as we've shown in the last video. We just have a matter of the intermediate mounts and, well, closing in this whole floor area here because, well, there's no floor. It's all rusted out and or cut out. We also need to patch the rocker panel areas around there and both sides and close all these areas in. Basically get it all back to a state where, well, we can actually put seats in here and start putting the rest of the body back together, because as you can see, we're missing everything. We're missing all the dash crap and the back seat area, the interior panels that go around there, the doors, everything. I don't know how we're going to handle the rear seat area because a lot of the metal we cut out was actually part of the mounting hardware that holds the back seat in. So we'll figure that out as we go along. And like I said before, worst case scenario will be no back seat in this car. So, I mean, that's neither here or there. Whatever the case is, anything's a lot better than this car ending up in the crusher. So we're just going to continue doing what we got to do. But as for the intermediate mounts, there were a couple of big ass bushings right here. As you can see, I hacked those out earlier. So these are clear. We're not even going to use any kind of rubber insulation here because if you look at how the floors are situated, all this here is really going to have to come up. And as I stated before, because that drive shaft hump is over the area where the actual drive shaft will be going, we don't have to worry about that hump right there. So my plan is going to be to put a piece of angle iron across from this rocker panel across that body mount over to the other side and use that as a support system to put some bolts down to hold the body at these points right here. Of course, I'm going to have to weld a whole bunch of metal in those areas there behind the rocker panels because there's nothing there. So, like I say, it's not even going to be like a normal body mount across here. We're just looking at kind of holding the center of the body sturdy, because when you really think about it, you want the area where the seats and the seat belt hardware go, where all that stuff goes, you want that to be as strong as possible, because, well, if you have an accident and the body does shift or break free or something, the last thing you want is for you to go with the body. So we want the area around here where we're sitting to be as sturdy and solid as possible. Seat belts, all that shit. So that's going to all be metal on metal. And there's another point in the front here under the firewall, another body mount area, that my plan with that is going to be to weld some angle iron across from there like that, weld a bolt to it, and it's going to go through there and have some rubber on it secured in place. We'll figure out a good clean way to do that, but that'll just be another anchor point to hold the body down in the middle-ish area. Our main cushion support areas, as seen in the last video, were the front and the back. So with that all said and done, we can start actually doing some final cutting of all the rotted metal out of the different areas and start dragging in some scrap sheet metal so we can actually start getting these floors put in. I can start working on those front mount areas there and get the metal welded in at those points so we can go ahead and get the mounts situated at the firewall, and little by little just start closing this thing back in. Of course, because all this metal is rotted and rusted and just overall garbage, don't expect this thing to look like some show car even with the metal patched in, because hey, if we were going to do this right in the first doggone place, we would have cut out all these rear quarters and welded in all new rear quarters and new rocker panels and all that stuff. But we're going super cheap on this build here because, well, this car was pretty much doomed to begin with. So anything we do to this car is going to be a grave improvement from where it could have been. It could have been in the crusher, or it could have just continued to rust into the earth and have nothing left. So yeah, don't expect this thing to look pretty when it's done. It's just going to be more of a Mad Max vibe kind of car. So continue doing a little bit of cutting and welding, grinding, all that good stuff, and start making some progress getting this body back together again. All right, as usual, before we do any real welding, we have to kind of clean up the area, which, as you see, I cleaned up the area quite a bit so we can test fit and make adjustments to fit this new old stock panel in here so we can start our floor patching process. Now obviously I'm gonna have to weld a lot more than just this in here. The way these areas are, I'm gonna have to add a whole lot of metal, as far as little pieces here and there, scrap pieces to fill in other gaps, whatever. But we're gonna start off with what we have and then add from that, add to that I mean. But well, anybody that knows this type of work, they know that there's a lot more to it than just simply cutting out metal and welding in stuff. If you want it to look neat, you're gonna have to do a whole lot of cutting. You're almost gonna have to know where all the seams are at for the different panels and all, and weld everything together right if you want it to look nice and factory. But we're not going for factory here. We're going for full-blown Mad Max post-apocalypse, piecing together a car to hit the road kind of deal. So got our panel right here, got our hole right here. Start fitting this panel in here and start burning some metal, and then move on. All right, we got our first pan welded in here. As you can see, I had to add some metal around there because I kind of overshot on the cutting, but that's no big deal. They'll all be covered up by carpet or something anyway. But we have that pan welded in. I also ran out of welding wire just after getting that, just about when I got it done. I got a little seam I still got to do in there. But in the meantime, what I ended up doing was some extra cutting based on how I'm gonna have to do my floor pans. I ended up hacking out the remainder of the rear floor section right there, because with the way the truck frame sits, that shock mount sits, I'm essentially going to have a straight pan going all the way across the top right there to the front. Now, what I did go and do is cut me some pieces of metal to go along this inner rocker panel seam, whatever you might call it. Put a piece of flat stock along here, put a piece of metal right here because all this stuff needs to be reconnected. Put a piece of flat stock right there to connect this piece of rocker panel up to there, and then later on I'll grind that out enough to where I could weld some sheet metal in there to fill that in, and then probably end up coming over there with some mud later. And same thing's gonna have to be done on that side right there. I'm gonna have to weld some flat stock or thick, large sections of rigid sheet metal in there, just something to fill in all that empty space, to provide me with a surface for anchoring some other metals, such as the angle iron piece that's got to go across here. And of course, when I do that, I'll have to cut out a section of that floor once again to accommodate that angle iron. So in the meantime, I have to get me some more welding wire, and then we go ahead and finish up that floor pan right there. We can start welding the metal that I had cut already for this right rocker panel section, get that all welded in, and then we can start doing the same thing on the left side as well as the floor pan on the left side too. So little by little, we just keep cutting and measuring and cutting and welding and cutting and over and over and over again until you start seeing more of this open floor become closed in floor. So the work continues. All right, had to do a little extra cutting on this replacement floor pan right here because of the contours around where the steering column and accelerator pedal and parking brake cable go. And rather than try to remove all that hardware and then try to redo all those hole cuts and everything, I just cut everything up to match these old contours and I'll just weld all that crap in and add metal wherever I need to in order to fill any gaps, because just like with the other side, we're not really going for Mecum quality sheet metal work. We're just trying to get a rusty car back together enough to where it could be a viable car instead of just a Flintstones mobile with holes in the floor and everything. So with this panel here done, I can then move on to trying to patch up other sections. Might go ahead and try to get these floors done right behind these panels, so I could go ahead and close up this third of the interior flooring right here before moving on to some of the other interior that needs to be patched just as well. Because this little section that I'm mentioning should be pretty easy to do. It's almost like a square piece of metal that would have to be welded in, nothing special. So go ahead, finish up this welding and move on to these other floors that I'm talking about. All right, we got the floor pan welded in here. Whole bunch of little patches welded in place all around the steering column opening and around right here on the edge, because things didn't line up exactly as intended. But all in all, the panel is welded in. Now, what we can see here is another front floor pan that actually would have went here or there. I don't know what side this is for, because I bought these used from another fella and I got a couple of doubles. So rather than just let this pan lay around and do nothing, I decided to use it as part of a patch for this opening right here, which involves me having to do a little manipulation, as you can see from some of these cuts that I made in here and the baby sledgehammer that was used to help manipulate the metal. Still got a little more work to do on this corner right here, but I'm shaping this panel to fit in the opening. I'll probably have to weld some patches into here just as well, but the main thing is I'm using this large piece of sheet metal to go ahead and fill this opening so I can accomplish the goal of patching the floor. So with that all said, once I get that done, all I have to do is just source one other large piece of sheet metal for that side over there on the right side there, weld that, cut that up, weld that in, and then we can actually start moving on to the rocker panel areas and add some more metal into those areas so we can further close in the quarter panel and tire wheel and all those other rusted out areas, so we can provide some more anchor points for welding some more sheet metal for more floor pans. So we're going to continue with our welding and cutting and all that good crap and continue to close this thing in, because, well, progress is progress. So let's go. All right, our plan to use that extra panel, that extra front floor pan right there, worked out. And of course it's going to work out because look at the thing. It's welded in place after being all cut up to fit into place. That's all good. Also had a change of plans with this floor pan right here. The old seat base pan was actually to a point that I figured I'll just get rid of it, since I actually had this pan right here. So I went ahead, hacked it out, ground the areas down to prep the surfaces for welding, cut the little notch right there for the Ranger frame rail, got that in place. And I also took time to cut a piece of scrap sheet metal for this floor pan right here. So once we get this pan welded in, we can go ahead and shape that one and get that one welded in just as well, so we can get this whole front third of the floor done. We got our floor pan done on the right side here. We have our seat mount pan welded in. As you've seen before, I trimmed the little notch out for the frame rail, the truck frame rail. Have this scrap piece of sheet metal right here that's been manipulated to fit in place. Got it all welded in. Didn't even have to add any extra metal, just a whole bunch of welding. Some of the welding's a kind of bit shitty because, well, flux core welder and shitty surfaces that I'm starting with, so you work with what you got. But got the pan mounted. As you can see right here, there's welds here because underneath, let's see here, there we go. Underneath right there, we got a piece of flat stock welded in place. Again, some shitty-ish welds, but that's only there to help add some rigidity to this piece of sheet metal because this is kind of thin, and without that piece of metal there, we'll get some flex action there while this car is rolling down the road, and that'll make for a noisy interior. So that's all that metal is there for. Didn't have to do it on that side because that aftermarket floor pan is rigid enough in its own right. Now, with this all said and done, my next area of operations is going to be right here on this inner rocker panel area. I already pre-cut some scrap metal to go in these spots. Still got a lot more area there to fill in as well. But we're starting off right there. That little trench right there, I had to cut a piece of scrap metal to go in there as well because all that metal is rotted out. Give me a second. As you can see right here, I take this piece of metal out, take that piece of metal out, there's really nothing here. This stuff was so rusted out that this is what we were left with after I cut out all the bad metal. So that metal there will help fill in these gaps right here. I have more of this rigid sheet metal to fill that gap in too, so we can get this whole area filled in. Now at some point I'm probably going to have to start doing some crude patching from the inside to fill in these rear quarters here and get all this area filled in. Same thing on that side there. Add some sheet metal from the inside so I could try to fill it in, and then probably come behind it with some mud to help smooth everything off. But our main area that we're going to focus on is right here, because the next move is going to be to put some angle iron across the backs of these seat mount panels to help add some rigidity to those pans, as well as add another piece of sheet metal across this last body mount point on this truck frame. And of course that'll involve welding a stud on that in order to help get it all solid on there. But in order to get from there, from that point there, I'm gonna have to add a piece of metal there too. But to get from there and to take care of this right here, we need solid metal in place so we could actually have something to anchor the angle iron to. Looking underneath here, I really didn't have to worry about going all the way across. Well, two reasons. One, couldn't really find any angle iron long enough to breach that gap, so I just got some 4-foot piece of metal and chopped it in half, so it'll go from the rocker panel area to that point there, welded in. Same thing on the other side. Go ahead and get all that stuff welded in. So once we get all this angle iron said and done in this middle section of the interior floor, I could then continue, as I stated, working on the rear quarter areas, add some metal patches right there, as well as the other interior structural points that I pointed out that I'll add some of that rigid flat sheet metal to. Then from there we could start actually cutting some large pieces of sheet metal with which to fill in the rest of the flooring so we can close in the entire interior of the car and try to wrap up the interior part of the job. So obviously with all that said and done, we can start moving on to some other things as far as our body reassembly and all, and probably some minor interior assembly, because after we put the flooring in, we have to look at the interior panels on the side in order to see if we're going to have to do any chopping on those panels to make them fit. Same thing with the back seat. See if we're going to even be able to use the back seat, much less have to chop up interior panels. But that is for the future. Well, the near future, hopefully. We still need to continue getting these floors put in. Alright, went ahead and took the time to patch up the inner rocker panel area on that side as well with the rigid sheet metal. Little bitty patch right there that needed to be filled in above that piece of flat stock. Another thing I will make note of, we'll go off on a bit of a tangent, is the gigantic holes that were present over the rear quarter panel area where it connects to the rocker panel. Both sides were rather trashed, and took the time to do a little patchwork. Looks like some Frankenstein garbagey looking work. Yes, it does. It looks like shit. But I had to peel a bunch of Bondo off because in a previous life, all this stuff was mudded up in order to repair the body, or at least make it look decent. That stuff has long since rotted away. So with these patches here like this, I can prep this area some more and come back over with some more mud and at least try to make it look somewhat decent, so I can at least somewhat restore the appearance of the body back to some original state. So go to the other side real quick. Well, actually, I'll make a quick note here that all that had to be patched up too. Still got to get that one little area right there, but I'll go to the other side to show you just how that all looks on that side. On this side, it's pretty much the same thing. Cut out areas of Bondo and excessive rust edges to make a good surface that I could weld up the sheet metal to, all scrap metal, even in the tire well. All this is scrap sheet metal welded up. Now in the tire wells, they're not going to worry about that. That'll just get covered up with paint or undercoating or something just to protect all that crap. But on these surfaces right here on the outside, all of that will be prepped and mudded up to make it look better. Even the door jamb right here needed to be patched up because it was just trash. So I took the time to cut little pieces of metal, weld all that in there. Can't do anything about this except paint over it. It's going to still look like this, but at least by painting over it, it'll kind of cover it up. A little close-up on the inside here shows how the sheet metal was welded in place, as well as the tire well here. All that was patched up and all. I left a couple little holes right there because there's actually a drainage hose connecting to these side things, whatever those are called. Water will eventually drain down in there, and if I welded all that up, water will collect and obviously rust this out yet again. And it's probably one of the things that helped contribute to these things rusting out as badly as they did. Anyway, moving on to the other important areas, we got our angle iron here cut and prepped to be welded in place. Move this tool out of the way. This piece here will actually be welded up to the back of the seat panel, floor pan here, and welded up underneath the drive shaft hump, as well as right there. Same thing on that side. Right here where we have our last set of body mounts, got another piece of angle iron cut for each side. Cut a little notch right there in the hump to accommodate the angle iron. Before I weld all this garbage in, I have to weld a bolt in place to go over the hole on the body mounts on both sides. So once everything is welded in, I could go ahead and lock all that down. So with all that, once we get all that crap done, we can then move into the home stretch, which is cutting large sections of sheet metal and probably some extra bracing posts, tubes, whatever, to help hold all that sheet metal in place to close in these last sections of flooring here, because that's really all that's left as far as closing this car in. The trunk floor we're going to leave alone because we don't know what we're going to do on the fuel tank situation as of yet. There's a few options that we'll end up covering in the next video when we're fitting this car out. But in the meantime, we're just going to continue on getting these floors closed in, getting all this structural support crap welded in, and try to wrap everything up, because part of the fitting out situation is also going to involve interior panels that we might have to modify just as well. And again, rear seats, don't know how that's going to play out, and try to start getting some of the body parts back on here too to wrap up the body part of this project. So go ahead and get this stuff done and move on to the next phase. All right, we got our angle iron all welded in. The seat mount panel, you can see it's all attached to the back of that on both sides. Got our last body mount addressed with the angle iron, and the bolt and a piece of rubber hose cut to act as a crude cushion between the angle iron and the frame rail. It's not going to be much, but it's something. And same thing on that side. I did have to add a little piece of metal here because I misjudged the cut on the hump here, but we got it all welded in. It's all taken care of. So with all of that said and done, other than maybe some extra supports going across points like here and here maybe, which they could be relatively light because they're not really going to be load bearing in the normal sense, we could actually start cutting larger sections of sheet metal for our floors. So I'm going to go fish out some large sections of sheet metal and probably some metal tubing to use for supports in these areas here, and get that all plotted out so we can start getting these floors done. Stand by. Okay, we welded a couple of pieces of sheet metal right here in this little middle spot between the angle iron. Same on that side to fill those points in. Then we went ahead and took some conduit, scrap conduit that I had, and welded it at different spots to kind of divvy up the remaining open space so we could have some support for the sheet metal that'll go in here. That last piece of conduit right there actually is two pieces. One's a 1/2 inch, the other one's like 3/4 inch, slid inside of each other and stretched across the back there. So like I said, we got a good amount of reinforcement right there to hold our sheet metal in place. I also took the time to fit the side panels that go here and on the other side, and from the way it looks after I do these floors and everything, I'm only going to have to probably trim off probably the bottom 6 inches of the panels. Not a whole lot of the panel has to come off in order to fit them in place, so we're really not destroying these panels for the most part. And even then, they're kind of old faded panels anyway, so it's not like we're taking nice brand new panels or anything. But either way, the whole thing is coming together. Once I get the sheet metal in place, I'll be able to then get the panels trimmed up and fitted in here, which is kind of putting the cart before the horse, but it is an important thing to look at, seeing that those panels need to be fitted in place if I want to get the interior put back together again, as well as even try to see if there's any vain attempt at being able to salvage the rear seat area. So far from the way it looks, I'm probably not going to be using the rear seat in here because of the whole floor situation, but like I say, we'll see. You never know. Things might actually go together surprisingly easy, even though it's not original or in the original intent. It might still go together. We just have to get everything put together, so we'll see how it works out. All right, we've got the floors done. As you can see, we welded several individual pieces of sheet metal across the conduit supports going all the way to the back. I started off with small tack welds to make sure the panels were in place, and then I went ahead and finished off with full welds all the way through until I ran out of wire, probably a few inches shy of completing all the welding right there. And there's a little bit right there that needs to be filled in, but all in all, everything is done. So another thing I did was bring these two interior panels down and situate them, because as I noted from the way it looks, the bottom where that outline of the back seat is marked at is about where I'm gonna start cutting on these panels in order to fit them in place. Now, one might say, you're gonna destroy all original interior panels. Well, yeah, pretty much. They're already faded and old and everything, so I mean, as far as really using them, that's not that big of a deal. And if I don't cut into them, well, we're not going to have any interior in this car. So that will be a little sacrifice I am willing to make in order to get this body closed back in and at least looking somewhat like it originally did, and be able to use this car in a more comfortable manner, because without the interior panels, it's going to be a little more noisier and draftier. So with all that, our floors are done, as I stated before. Next thing is going to be to go ahead and trim these panels down so I could get them mounted, even though that's kind of putting the cart before the horse, because that would be part of my fitting out segment. But I just felt like trying to get these panels in there just to make myself feel better that I was able to actually use these panels. But once we get the panels done, then we're going to move on to actually starting to assemble the body, which of course you would obviously figure would include the doors, the front clip, even kind of patching up these front fenders and securing them completely, and trunk lid. Like I say, it's basically some small body stuff and some more crude body patching, such as what I did right there. That'll be done on the fenders and on the rear portions of these rear quarter panels. Of course, I'll need more welding wire, but yeah, we're coming along pretty good in this little segment here. We'll eventually be done with all the body stuff, and we can indeed move on to fitting out the car, which will include all the other crap: engine, exhaust, interior components, steering column, the seats, other little interior panels, fuel tank, whatever's left. Electrical, got to rewire the whole car. But yep, we're coming along. We're gonna get this thing done. So let's continue on. All right, I've managed to get these interior panels in. As you can see, I trimmed along the bottom to get them to match the contours of the new floor. I actually cut a little bit off at a time so I don't end up cutting too much of the stuff off, because, well, these are kind of hard to replace. Well, they're not hard, they're just expensive. But got them trimmed down enough to where they'll fit. Got screws in place to hold them in where they're normally supposed to be. I did have to actually add a little angle bracket at the bottom on both sides to hold it at the bottom, since all the mounting points along the bottom are chopped off. Another thing I managed to do is add a little pair of wires connected to the marker lights, same thing on that side, so when I rewire the car, I could include these little interior lights in the mix. So with that all said and done, we went off on a little bit of a tangent, put these interior panels in there. I'm satisfied with that. So now we can move on to actually assembling the body, which got a number of parts to put on the body. So go ahead and get to that next. Okay, we got some body panels down here. All the stuff that originally came off the car, brought back down from the garage and staged so I can start the reassembly. Or in the case of the doors, we can start the reassembly, because these doors are pretty heavy. But I'm going to start in the easiest spot, which is in the rear. And you could probably see this panel right here that looks like it's installed half-assed, because it is, because the frame underneath is actually in the way. Get a good angle right there. Well, either way, you can see how the Ranger frame is pushing up against the panel at these points here. What that means is I'm gonna have to cut this panel in order to get this thing to sit at the angle it's supposed to through the frame, through the cross member piece and everything. And I know there's somebody that's gonna cry about butchering original Mustang parts, but rest assured this panel's raggedy. Nobody's gonna miss it if I hack it up. So we're gonna hack that up, get that put on, and then as well we're gonna go ahead and knock the other stud out that's broken off from the bolt in this bumper bracket, and go ahead and remount that. Now I could also get new bumper brackets and just put all new hardware on there, but again, we're going cheap. And for right now, I'm gonna do whatever I can to reuse all this garbage, because I don't have the money to be buying brand new parts trying to build this thing. We'll address that stuff at a later time when funds are a little more available. So for right now, put our panel on and our bumper on. Alright, we got the bumper and the rear valance panel on. As you've seen, I had to do a bunch of cutting on the rear valance panel to get it to fit around the truck frame rails, which we got that all said and done. I mean, it's not pretty, but it is functional. It is in. All this body was already pretty distorted, especially around the back there where I had to do all that welding for structural integrity. The bumper sort of covers all that up. We got a little bit of gappage right there on the right side compared to the left side there. As we can see right there, we got a little bit less gappage there. But yeah, it's kind of expected with a distorted, jacked up body like this, but we got it all in. I had to use some 3/8 bolts, grade 8 bolts with lock nuts, lock washers, in order to hold everything together, which it's held together. It's in. It's not jiggling around or anything. So with that all said and done, since I'm right here, I also need to go ahead and weld up this trunk lid latch thingy right here. Have to weld this up, and then while I'm at it, I could put the trunk lid on, which even though it's rusted all to hell, I might do a little crude patching on the inside there where it's all holdy, and put that on. And then I could also see where and how I need to weld this thing up so the trunk lid will close at least flush. So as we're getting our trunk lid on, I'll go ahead, get this all together here, then yep, get this all adjusted and all that. Got it all said and done. So now with all that, my next move is going to be to actually work on the doors. Now I can hang the doors up immediately, which I'll probably go ahead and do, or more accurately, we will go ahead and do. But our main thing is getting these doors up, because, well, that's 2 more panels out of the way. Yeah, got our door on. The latch ain't exactly right, but it does line up on the back end there. I have to get this fender secured at the bottom so it'll be straight on the bottom as well, but for all intents it's got a decent gap near the top here. So I already figured I'm gonna have to work with the latches anyway, so I just wanted to get the doors in place. But yeah, doors open, door closes, the latching mechanisms meet up with the little knobs on the panel there. So get on over here to the other door and get this sucker put on. Got our left side, driver's side door in, as with the right side. the latch is fucked up. It won't latch. So, yep, we will be going into these doors later on. But all in all, gabbage is good. Gabbage is pretty decent. I still got to secure that fender at the bottom as well. But all in all, the lines are pretty decent there. So our doors are on. You can even see right here, gabbage along that A-pillar, good. So with our doors done for all intents as far as mounting, we can start looking at our front clip hardware. Okay, on our front valance panel, we pretty much had to do the same thing like we did on the rear valance, and that was cut notches where the truck frame interferes with the fitment of the panel. Now, some of this stuff was so rusted as far as the thread things that hold the bolts, a lot of that crap had to be cut out, so I'll be using nuts and bolts in some spots. I also have this top panel, I don't know what it's called, that'll be going on here as well. I need to see how everything fits, just to see if I could just kind of maybe put these two pieces together as one and then secure it that way. I don't know, I'm just really looking at it and again shooting from the hip as far as putting everything together, because well, this whole front end goes together in kind of a weird way in my opinion. And all these panels are pretty ratty anyway, so hacking into them and doing whatever I need to do to them to make everything fit and look somewhat decent, it won't be that big of a deal. So even if I had new panels, I'd probably have to do the same thing, so whatever. But try to get this panel, finish getting this front valance panel on and this intermediate panel, whatever it's called, because the biggest part is going to be trying to figure out how to put our bumper on right there, because the support bars that originally held the bumper are gone. So even the frame rail where they used to mount at is gone. So I'm going to have to get creative on mounting our bumper. But once we get the valance and all on there, I might actually move on to our grill and headlights and get that mounted as well. So so we're going ahead and getting this valance on right now, put our bolts in, stretch metal, do whatever we got to do to make it fit. Also go ahead and put this top part in, get that in real quick, see if I have to stretch any metal to make that work as well. All right, we got the front valance on along with that intermediate piece on the top. There's a couple of anchor points that are missing because all the metal was rusted, and that's on the ends on both sides. So this is kind of floppy a little bit, but we can probably, if I really wanted to, I could probably do some bootleg shit where I put like a strap or something across the side right here to link that together, or even take some metal and put it there and just weld it in place on both sides and kind of make this one whole piece, which is something I really wanted to do anyway. And that might be our next option, just to kind of make things easier and try to neaten it up to close all these gaps and all. All right, we got our intermediate panel welded up to the valance panel, secured all the way around as it was. I also took a moment to put our hood latch bracket back on for a couple reasons. One, because it needs to go back on. Secondly, our grill assembly here, if I'm not mistaken, actually has a couple of mounting points along the top here that mount on top of that bracket. Another thing that I also looked at that kind of dispelled my quest to make this all one piece is the idea that these covers right here, if I put them on, they cover up a couple of bolt holes down there necessary to secure this piece to the body, which means this has got to go on first, then those little pieces go on afterwards. So it is what it is. I just go ahead, and since we have our hood latch thing mounted in place, we can go ahead and get this grill assembly thingy mounted and get those covers put on as well. And well, at the same time that I'm mounting this grill assembly thing, I'm gonna have to do some examining to see if I might not need to add some bolt holes somewhere, because I don't know, all the stuff, the way it came apart, it's not necessarily going back together the way it originally did, but that's neither here or there. If I have to drill a hole somewhere to put a nut and bolt to hold everything in place, I'll do that, as long as it's well hidden and just not obvious that it was put back together in a half-assed sort of way. So yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and finish up this grill part so we can get to the most fun part, which is figuring out how the hell I'm gonna get the front bumper mounted. All right, got our front end pretty much done, minus the bumper, of course. Had to drill some extra holes in places in order to use nuts and bolts to retain the entire assembly around the headlights and all, because of rust causing broken bolts in the old mounting points. Yeah, it's expected, but took care of it. Even the headlight buckets, I had to add a sheet metal screw here or there in order to hold the headlight bucket in place because of rusted tabs and whatnot, not allowing me to secure the headlight buckets the way they should have been. So if you've seen what all had to be done, you'd realize, yeah, we did some pretty bootleg stuff, but hey, as long as it works, in the end, that's all that matters, because obviously the only way to remedy that issue is to just replace all this garbage. And as I stated before, we're not doing that. That's going to get expensive. So we're working with the rusted out shit that we have. But as you can see, it's all together. So with our whole headlight, grill, valance panel, mix match of shit put together, we can now start looking at our front bumper right there, and we can figure out just how the hell we're going to actually mount this damn thing. So let's get started. Okay, after looking around, I was able to find the brackets that were used to mount the front bumper to the front subframes. But that doesn't mean that we're out of the fire yet, because, well, we hacked up the front subframes, if you remember, in order to mount the body to the truck frame. So what that's going to mean is we're going to have to figure out some kind of way to get those mounting points on these brackets onto whatever part of the body I can in order to get this bumper lined up where it needs to be. As you can see, I already mounted the brackets to the bumper using some 3/8 nuts and bolts because, well, the carriage bolts that were originally used had to get hacked out due to rust. So with that, I could at least try to get the bumper in a position where I need it to be and the brackets lined up about where I need it to be in order to try to figure out what I'm going to do to mount this garbage. So go ahead and get all this stuff in position and see what's going to come next. I have no idea. Okay, what I ended up having to do, obviously, was disconnect our brackets from the bumper. I stuck the bumper in place about where it's going to really need to go as far as alignment is concerned. And looking underneath, we can also see I hacked up the bracket because our forward mounting, body mounting point right there is obviously in the way. And about where the bracket would need to go, as you can see, there is no subframe there. So I hacked that bracket up so it'll fit in place. I'm going to have to trim it some more. But what I'm going to also end up having to do is probably weld the shit out of it and make it a permanent fixture on this little section of remaining subframe right there so I can mount the bumper in position. So what I'm going to do is probably do a couple little tack welds on the bracket to get a rough idea of where it needs to go, or at least confirm my eyeball fitment of the bracket. So if the bumper still looks like it's in good position, once I weld it up with the tack welds, I could then fully weld it in place, as well as do the same with the other side. All right, we went ahead and did some, let's get this stupid camera to focus. There we go. We have some little tack welds on the brackets, as we could see right here. If the stupid camera would focus. There we go. We have some little welds on the brackets, and I also took the time while fitting the bracket to secure it to the bumper. Same thing with that side. So when I went ahead and actually did the welds, the bumper was actually in place where I wanted it to be. So as we can see, let's zoom out, the bumper actually sits pretty good. So for all intents and purposes, I could have just went ahead and finished welding the whole works on both sides and wrap all this garbage up, because hey, look at it, it sits pretty straight. So yeah, like I say, I'll go ahead and finish welding all that shit together on both sides. Take a quick look on this side as well. You can see same thing there. I trimmed some of the bracket in order to fit it in place. Did a few little welds to hold it in position. Verified the fitment of the bumper, and everything looks pretty good. So we're gonna go ahead and finish welding this shit together so we can wrap up everything, because the only thing left at this point is to finish securing these front fenders and do some little patching, some more crude patching I might add, on the front fenders as well as the backs of the rear quarters in much the same way as I'd done before. Alright, we're done with the welding of the bumper brackets. This side's caked up because I had some spacing, some gapping that had to be filled in to ensure proper security. But the brackets are in place, and on either end of the bumper there was another mounting point right here where there was a little clip bracket type thing that was all jacked up on both sides. But temporarily what I ended up doing was drilling a hole through the fender, which, okay, yep, putting holes in more sheet metal, yep, and this sheet metal's trash, so don't worry about it. Put a hole through there. Temporarily I put a long bolt through there to secure this to that. But what I will want to do later is find something to use as a bushing to space this out just a teeny little bit, like a 1/4 of an inch or something, so the bumper is not actually on the sheet metal. So temporarily that's secured. I also snugged up the bolts that are holding the bumper to the brackets. Temporarily they're just regular hex head bolts, but I'll try to find me some carriage bolts that'll fit in those holes so I can go ahead and secure them and have them looking somewhat original, I guess. Now you could even look at the bumper and tell that, yeah, the bumper is shitty too. So really every part on this car is, you know, it's at my discretion whether I need to poke a hole in it, weld something out of it, do whatever the heck I need to. But the bumper is officially secured to the body, along with everything else on the front clip, as we can see. So like I said, up next is some more bootleg body work after I get these fenders secured at the bottom, which is probably going to include some more possible welding of tabs or brackets or whatever in order to be able to attach these raggedy bumpers in place. So that's going to be our next little thing. seen, we got all our crude patching done all along the rear quarters, as we had to do. Same thing with the front fenders. Super ugly, but it's done. Of course, like I said, I'll have to come back over this with some mud to smooth it out and hopefully try to make it look better. Or if I'm really feeling wild, just leave it as is, because it's kind of got its own weird look to it, you know, like Frankenstein or something. But the last bit of business that we had to do was get the doors straight. And luckily, I didn't have to do anything with the mechanisms. I just had to grease everything up and free everything up because it was all rusty. As we could see, everything works. Our driver's window's a little rough, but all our mechanisms for the lock and latches work like they're supposed to. The door closes inside and out. The locks work. Windows work. Same thing here. Doors work. So we're ready for business on the doors. Of course, in the distant future, I will probably still replace a lot of this stuff because, well, it's rusted and old and ratty. But for right now, it works. So with that all said and done, as you can clearly see, the body is all said and done. It's all patched up, put together, welded up, all that good stuff. Most of everything on the body is working like it's supposed to. So at this point, we can take a brief pause so we can conclude this video and get ourselves ready for round 4, which is going to be fitting out everything else in the car, which, as you can see, it needs everything else. And that'll even bring us to our issue with the back seat area. We'll touch on that just as well. But we still have to fit out the brakes, some suspension stuff, got to do all the engine stuff, drive shaft, even the fuel tank and trunk area, tail lights, rewire the whole car, put some HVAC in here, all that good stuff. So we will be visiting that in part 4, so stay tuned for that. But until the next time, go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button if you hadn't already. Click on that notification so you could be notified when part 4 or something else shows up. And positive comments are always welcome. We all need encouragement and light constructive criticism. We don't need assholes out there trolling. So yeah, I always respond to comments when warranted in a timely manner. I will respond to all decent comments and little critiques and whatnot. But that's enough babbling. Till next time, I will catch you later. I am done. I'm out.